Hello, everyone, and a big thank you to Marcel and Patrick for the nice introduction. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you about causal decision making. And I am here on stage, again, very happy to be here, but this is the work of many of my colleagues, so please don't think this was all just me. The work I will be talking about is actually based on a research paper that we will also present at Rexis next week. And so that's in Prague. So on Saturday, actually, I'm taking a train with a few people here in the room, actually, down to Prague. So when you're also there, please come say hi and talk to us about this. So the core focus of this talk is about products or personalization. And specifically, I'm going to be focusing on the CRM use case. From a very high level, what you have on one hand is a certain sort of consumer application, and you have a certain sort of end user, right? And as an application, you would like to talk to your users. I think this is the most dummy version that I can think of for this problem. And there's many reasons why you might actually want to talk to people, why you might want to talk to your users. You might just want to nudge them because they haven't been sort of active in a while. Maybe you have a sort of personalized recommendation. Sorry, I think I have to point this for it to work. Maybe you have some sort of personalized recommendation. Maybe you have a certain discount you want to offer to users. Maybe it's about user education or new features, right? There's all these loads of different reasons why you might want to talk to people about your business. And when you do that, it's not just about sending a single message. You have to make so many decisions about how you're going to do that. Which message do you want to send? Who are you going to send those messages to? When are you going to send it? Via which channel? What about? What's going to be your copywriting? Why do you actually want to send those messages? And so the focus really here is about how we want to optimize these decisions, because that's not always an easy task. But we're not the first ones to think about this, right? This is a very established field, and there is a sort of classical tried and tested approach that people follow. And that is the sort of ABN test, where we have a user. For this user, we essentially roll a dice. We figure out which variant that we want them to be assigned to. We send a message. We can observe what happens. And then based on that, doing that over and over again, we kind of measure and aggregate, and now we know, hey, apparently this green message is the one that wins, and that's perfect, now we're done. Well, I don't fully agree with that. I think there's a couple of assumptions baked into this approach that make it suboptimal. First of all, you're gonna essentially treat all users equally when you're doing this, right? And you can say, oh no, that's not true. We can segment, that's true. But we're all here for experimentation. We all know that if you start segmenting, you're gonna lose a lot of power in your experiments, and there's always gonna be this trade-off and this tension that's not easy to deal with. You're essentially only gonna focus on a single facet, right? So typically it's, we're gonna optimize when we send something, or we're gonna think about a headline, or we're gonna think about an image. But we essentially constrain ourselves to a limited and fixed set of options, and then that's what we're going to really focus on in the experiment. We also focus on a single metric, because that's kind of the frameworks that we have that work best are just with a single KPI. We look at the p-value, we say this is good or not. Then we typically look at the ATE, the average statement effects. That's kind of what we do. And if you're happy with that, then you found the optimal message. But maybe the word optimal is a little bit narrowly defined here. And what then happens is, we've only done this for a single facet. Maybe this entire procedure took a month, and then we kind of rinse and repeat, right? We go on with the next problem, and we keep on doing this. And so why do we do this? Why have we gotten here? I think the reason is quite clear. A/B testing, or randomized control trials in general, are the gold standard for measuring things. They have been around since a long time now in science, and there's a good reason for that. They really work well. But I would argue that measurement is not really the problem that we're trying to deal with here. We're trying to make decisions. And looking at this sort of explore then commit approach in decision making, it's actually provably suboptimal. So I imagine this is a little bit small on the slide for you to read, but it says that it's a research paper from 2016 showing that all strategies based on an exploration phase up until a stopping point followed by an exploitation phase, so that's just running an A/B test, picking a winner and shipping it, are provably suboptimal, always. And that's an interesting thing to me. So like even before we're considering all of these assumptions, why this might not be the best approach, just running an A/B test is, like also without those assumptions, not going to be the best thing you can do. And what are some of these assumptions? Well, first of all, I think, because we're treating this as all users equally, or maybe core segments, you kind of get, you assume that there's very low heterogeneity among users. You're assuming everyone will respond kind of similarly. So, in my test, I can find the best thing for everyone. You're assuming user preferences are static, which is, probably also a little bit of a stretch. You're assuming that your available options are static, that, like over the course of the experiments, there are not new things popping up in the A/B tests that you can choose. That typically doesn't work. And why do we make these assumptions? I don't think it's because like anyone here in the room thinks that they're true. I think it's because the tools that we have just kind of make it easy to work with. Because doing this type of manual orchestration with A/B testing really just becomes intractable if you don't make those assumptions. But that doesn't mean that they're right. And so now I will talk about what we like to call CRM 2.0, I think a very sort of catchy name for this. And so I've got a figure here from the paper, kind of describing what we do and how we try to use agentic infrastructure as a flywheel, really, as a feedback loop that kind of self-reinforcements. So you have users on one hand. Those users will generate data. That data then typically gets interpreted by the humans in the loop. So these are your CRM professionals who have done this for a long time, who know how to do this. Figure out, who are the personas here, what are the audiences we want to think about, what are the different channels, what are the different actions, what's the different timing, what are the different copywriting options. All of these kinds of things, they kind of try to define an action space. And that action space is going to be used by agents to learn from. So they will use this action space and this data to figure out what they maybe should be doing for a certain user. And then all of these different actions, these different individual decisions get composed into treatments. And so a treatment really is a sort of individualized personal user experience journey, if you want. That was lots of buzzwords in that sentence, I think. But that's kind of what you would hope to get. So how does this sort of alleviate these assumptions? Well, the data gets updated over time, and so we can handle dynamic shifts in these preferences. There's a human in the loop who defines this action space and refines it as well, and so that allows to have dynamic options for the agents to then turn those into really personalized experiences. But how do these agents work? So that's going to be the core thing that I'll talk about for the next couple of slides. There will be a few equations, but I don't think it's anything bad. So essentially, if you're an agent who wants to make a decision, in a fully sort of automated way, I would say there's 4 different steps. So first, you want to measure. You want to know how to measure outcomes that you care about. Then you want to incorporate controls. You kind of want to make sure that the things you measure are actually causal effects and not just correlations. Once you've made estimates of causal effects, well, that's nice, but as I said, we're not talking about measurement. We want to make a decision, and so that's going to be the key next thing. You're making these decisions in a modular way that we then sort of synthesize into messages. So here's our sort of end user again. There's a certain timeline. Maybe this user clicked on a couple of things. They then maybe added something to cart. There was a long period of no activity. They clicked again, they add to cart, and they bought something. Great. So how do I actually turn this into a scalar value that I can measure? Well, it's called scalarization. So typically you would kind of assign a weight to all of these different events. Maybe, we have some causal way of figuring out, revenue is clearly going to be an important thing. Clicks contribute a little bit. And so you kind of have these weights set in a way. And so the outcome over a certain time period is then, the sum of the weights of all of the observed events. Sure, fine. But actually, we care about outcomes in relation to an intervention, right? In relation to a message that we sent. So we're also gonna try and consider time as well, where there's a certain point in time where we actually had an intervention, and then we're gonna assign weights based on how far away an event is to the intervention time, right? If I send an email now and you buy something in 6 months, maybe it's a bit of a stretch to say that email led to that. And so once we've done that, great. But this is still not going to be a causal thing, you know? You now are able to look at it as a scalar value, but we're really still not sure that, well, if y is higher, that this is actually going to be caused by the message that we sent. In order to do that, we have to think about controls. And the first one is really just going to be based on time. So, you know, we kind of shift this timeline up, and we can also look at what happened in the pre-intervention period, right? We can see whether people were actually clicking or buying or adding to carts in that period. And it might be that that's not the case, right? So we can then measure, you know, the outcome in the pre-experiment period, the outcome in the post-intervention period. And then, you know, we can look at the difference, and we're golden, right? Well, that's not the case if you think about seasonality, right? Because if you send a message at 9 a.m., you know, maybe the fact that no one was buying something between 4 a.m. and 9 a.m. And is buying something between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m., you know, maybe that's not really being caused by the message. That's just, you know, standard seasonality. So we also have to consider a control user. So we'll have the user who we sent the message to. We figure out, you know, with this scalarization, what happened before the intervention, what happened after. We look at a hopefully somewhat similar user. We measure what happened in the pre-intervention period and the post-intervention period, even though there was no intervention. And now you can look at the difference in this. And so this is a difference in differences, which is kind of a famous method in sort of causal inference. And so that's kind of what the agents can then use to figure out, well, what was actually the causal effect that I got from this message. And so, you know, here's one more visualization to kind of drive it home, where, you know, we have time on the x-axis, the outcome on the y-axis. There's a certain trend for the control user that, you know, might already be going up, and then for the treatment user, we can really see that at the time of intervention, the outcome definitely changed. And so, using all four sort of quadrants in that plot, we can hopefully get decent estimates of causal effects. And so that's that then. We have an estimate of a causal effect. We can maybe plot those. You know, we have 3 different messages to send. I can look at the estimated causal effect. Oh, the yellow message here has a slightly higher effect, right? So maybe that's what I want to choose then. But, you know, maybe also not, because sometimes you have a lot of uncertainty with these kinds of things. And so maybe that plot actually looks a lot more like this, where for the red one, we're reasonably sure where we are. You know, the confidence bound around the estimate is going to be quite tight. Maybe for the yellow one, well, we're mostly looking at noise, and this might not be a thing you want. So you need to find a way to somehow figure out, how do we balance exploration and exploitation and make these decisions under uncertainty. And so that's why we leverage these so posterior distributions over estimated causal effects for sort of Thompson sampling. And so what that means, again, I think this is, you know, if you're not used to working with this, it's a scary equation. But what that means is you essentially just sample a value from those confidence intervals, and you send the message that has the maximal one. And so there's some provable things about how you're gaining information whilst maximizing outcomes when you're doing that. Okay. So that's great. We know how to measure something, we know how to turn it into a decision. So let's think about, I think, a reasonable example of how we want to do this, right? Maybe we have 6 time slots across 7 days. There's a couple of channels. We can send push notifications, like an email, maybe a WhatsApp message. There's a few different offerings, right? I think all of these, like, none of those numbers seem unreasonable to me. They even seem quite low. But it turns out that if you just treat this as, you know, a discrete decision-making problem, you get over 1 million options, right? So there's this like sort of combinatorial explosion of the action space that's really going to be a problem if you don't deal with it in a smart way. So the way we deal with it is we try and look at these as like different modules, where we have modular actions about timing. There's modular action space about channels, for example, about offering, about copywriting aspects. And so all of these are kind of handled independently in parallel and then composed into a treatment for the user. Right. So I said there's four different aspects that we really need. First one was, how do we measure these things? Well, that's using a sort of interrupted time series where you kind of look at what happened before, what happened after. That's not enough to be causal, so you need this difference in differences approach to make it a causal estimate. You can use Thompson's AMP to go from estimates to decisions, and then you're using modular actions. This has something to do with something called Wolpertinger architecture in reinforcement learning. That might sound very weird to you. I don't know, it might ring a bell for a couple of people. I decided to sort of add it in the slide. And so, having all of these things all together kind of leads to an agent that can harmoniously make these decisions. So does this actually work? I guess is the next burning question in people's minds. So I'll briefly talk about some sort of empirical validation that we had in the paper, where we're talking about a 3-week A/B test on a multi-service app. So there's a certain fraction of the users was getting their legacy system, their control system, which is typically rule-based optimizations that have been sort of iteratively optimized over years. There's been a lot of investment in that, and then what we were sort of able to do for them with the agents. The fact that it's a multi-service app is really nice, because the fact that you get this large sort of heterogeneity of features really means that there's a lot of space for impact, because you have all of these different aspects that can benefit from shared learning. There were several markets, which means there's high differences among users, which is also going to be very valuable. And we had around 6.4 million users in the test. 4 different product marketing use cases. You'll see on the next slide in the plot that there's one use case where we don't have numbers for GMV. That's because it was a use case around sort of creating a certain type of account, which doesn't lead to money in itself per se. And in control, I mentioned already. So we look at results across the funnel. So first of all, we can just think about which users are showing intent. Clicking on something, reading the sort of terms and conditions, maybe even adding something to carts. We can see that sort of across these features, these different transactional features and account features, the relative improvements over the number of people that were actually using this feature. That is weird. I don't know what happened there. Okay, we're back. I'm sorry about that. The relative increase for the number of users who were actually using those features is really quite high, right? So it's ranging here from 7% up to the number of people who actually use that account feature. By targeting the right messages, you're actually able to more than double that. And those numbers are quite significant, right? So you can see tiny little red sort of error bars on there. These are 99% confidence intervals. So this really does seem to hold up quite nicely. And we've not just looked at intent, of course, we've looked across the funnel, how many users are actually converting. You can see that these numbers are similar, actually even a little bit higher, right? You can see for most of the use cases, it's in the double digits here, in the number of people that we can actually get to convert, which I think is really nice. And then for GMV, of course, as you go down the funnel, you get more and more noise coming in, so you get kind of a broader, wider sort of confidence intervals. But also here we see that these results really seem to hold up quite nicely. So again, all between 10 and 34% increases in GMV. I think that's really quite nice, and kind of shows the power of trying to move beyond using A/B testing for making decisions. I think that's just sometimes not the optimal thing to do. So to conclude, I really like A/B testing and randomized control trials when we're talking about measurement. I think it's an amazing tool, and I think we shouldn't just forget about it. But when you're trying to make decisions, this explore then commit is just provably suboptimal, and that's even before considering all of these things where we're bucketizing users into these huge segments. It's just not the right thing you want to be doing. And so using this kind of agentic infrastructure can really unlock personalization. I've got a final note there, which is just a little bit of a personal pet peeve maybe, is when people talk about agents, people typically think, oh, it's an LLM. It's this big model that I can talk to and it can talk back to me. But I think, the word is about agency. It's about systems that can, in an automatic way, make certain decisions, trying to maybe causally influence something. And so I think, using, at least what we did here was using methods from standard causal inference and econometrics and contextual bandits all together. We can sort of unlock agency in that way as well. So then I would just like to thank all of you for listening to me. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, to be honest. Otherwise, we'll talk later. Thank you.